Hello there, Michelle Shorts here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a card to share with you using the Wild Poppies stamp set and Spotlight ink blending. So I'm starting off with a panel of white cardstock. This is 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, and I'm going to stamp the large floral image from the Wild Poppies stamp set on top. I'm just centering that up into the panel. This is going to be the front of my card. And I'm going to stamp that down with some extreme black ink. This is the first time I've used this stamp, and sometimes with the manufacturing process some residue gets left behind, so I'm just using my fingers to rub over the stamp. It doesn't particularly look that nice, but it does help the ink adhere to the stamp. So I'm inking that up really nicely. I'm using extreme black ink because it works really well with lots of different mediums. So just inking that up very well, and then I can stamp that down. And I am using the mini MISTI here because I do want to stamp this multiple times just so that I get a really nice dark impression. So I'm just inking that up again and stamping that down. And I do this 3 times, like I said, just so that I get a really nice dark impression. And then I have taken another panel of white cardstock. This is the exact same size, 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I don't necessarily need it to be the exact same size, but it is quite helpful with the placement, and you'll see that a little bit later. So I'm going to stamp this another couple of times onto this panel. I do stamp it a 3rd time, but I'm going to do some ink blending in between the different layers. So here I am taking some distress inks and I'm going to add some colour onto this panel. I'm using blending brushes here because I want quite a light coverage of this ink. I do go over it multiple times just so that I get the coverage that I want, but I do still want it to be quite light in colour. I wanted it to kind of look like the poppies are sort of blowing in the wind, if that makes sense. So I did want to give it kind of like a wispy look. I know that poppies aren't generally blue in colour, but I do really like blue flowers, so I wanted to go with blues today, but I think reds would look really pretty as well. So this is the lightest shade, and that was Mermaid Lagoon. And then I'm going in with the mid-tone shade here, which is Blueprint Sketch. With the Spotlight, I'm doing it as ink blending today, but you could do it as colouring as well. I have done that in the past, and that's probably the more traditional way to do this technique. And if I was to do that, I would probably cut out my images first and then do the colouring afterwards. But because I'm doing the ink blending, I wanted to do the ink blending first and then cut out the images. And I'm also going to re-stamp the image as well, just to make sure that none of that ink has gone over the top of the black lines. So this is my darkest shade here, and this is the Chipped Sapphire colour. I know that my images are not going to go all the way down to the bottom of the panel when I cut them out, so I don't really need to focus much of the ink blending down towards the bottom. I'm just going between all of the different colours here just so that I get a nice blend between them. Just going back in here with the Blueprint Sketch again, just to add a little bit into the middle. And then I'm adding that panel back into the mini MISTI, and then I'm going to stamp that image down for a 3rd time. Like I said, this makes sure that I get a really nice dark impression. Next, I'm going to cut the panel out using the Stitched Circle Die-namics. So I'm just figuring out here where I want the placement of the circles to be. And this is why it's quite helpful having the panel the same size as my card front, just so that I can see visually where they're all going to end up being on the card. Once I'm happy with the placement, I'm using some low tack tape just to adhere those down, and then I can run that through my die cutting machine, and then I can pop out those circles. You could do this with lots of different shapes. I think it would look really pretty actually just doing a rectangle in the middle and having that coloured and all of the rest left white. But I wanted to use circles today just for something different. And I do think I could probably use this panel for something else as well. I did end up throwing it away, but you probably could manage to use it for something. Next, I have cut 2 layers of the same size of circles, and I've just cut that from some white cardstock. And I'm going to use this to layer up the images. I want there to be a little bit of dimension onto these circles. You could use foam tape, but I quite like having the cardstock behind. I think it gives a little bit more stability. So I'm just using some on-point precision glue here just to stick those layers together. I like using liquid glue for this just so that I've got a bit of a wiggle room to be able to make sure that they're completely straight on top of each other. Next, I'm going to take the sentiment from the set, and this sentiment reads "Hello Beautiful." And I'm going to stamp it onto some black cardstock using Versamark ink. So I'm just prepping my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool. Just brushed off the excess powder and then inking that stamp up with the Versamark ink. And then I can apply some white embossing powder. I apply it, then tap off the excess, and I do apply that a couple of times just to make sure that I get a nice coverage. And then I can use my heat tool to heat that up to make sure it's completely melted. And then once it's melted, I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine with one of the skinny strips Die-namics. And then I can just cut off the 2 sides using my mini guillotine. Here I've got the panel that I stamped originally, and I'm just adding some adhesive onto the back of that and adding that onto a top folding white card base. So the finished size is 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. Here I've got my circle pieces and I'm just working out where they need to be placed. This is kind of like a puzzle, similar to using die cut inlay, but this time I'm actually doing it over the top. So just working out pretty much where they are going to be. And then once I'm fairly happy with that they're all going to line up correctly, I can then take some more of the on point precision glue and just adhere that onto the back of the pieces. And then I'm going to stick those down. And I wanted to show you here that it does take some time to figure out, because you want to make sure that all of the lines, this is, like I said, quite a detailed image, so you want to make sure that all of the lines kind of line up. The best way I found to do it is to lean right over the images, so you can see my big head in the way there, and it did take some time to line it up, but if you lean right over the image, it is a little bit easier to line everything up. So I'm just going to do the same thing here for the other 2 circles. I think this would look really nice using like a word die or something like that as well. Like I said, you could use lots of different shapes for the die cuts. You could actually even do this with a stencil as well. You could just stencil in some shapes, and I think that would look quite pretty, and that would make a 1-layer card as well if you wanted to keep it really flat. But I do like the dimension, and I think it's something a little bit different with them popped up. So just sticking that last one down there. And then I've got my sentiment here, and again I'm just working out where I want it to be placed. And then once I'm happy with that, I can add some foam tape onto the back. And then using my T-square ruler just to make sure that it's going to be adhered flat, or straight I should say, I'm just adhering that down. And then to finish off, I'm just going to add some iridescent jewels. So I'm using the On Point Precision Glue again, just to add small dabs of that onto the card. And then I can pick up the jewels and just put them in place. And the glue is kind of white in colour at this point, but when it dries, it does dry completely clear. And that's the card finished for today. I hope you'll give the technique a try. Like I said, you can use lots of different shape dies or even a stencil. Links to the products that I used will be in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.